So welcome, everyone. Welcome to our Cloud Leadership Circle monthly meetup. We're joined today with Tracey, the head of developer relations at Expansio, and he is going to talk to us about their open source compute over data project. So Sean, please take it away.
Hey everyone, I'm Sean. As Megan just said, I'm the head of developer relations at Expansio. We at Expansio are the original creators and most active maintainers of the open source project Bacalhau, which is a distributed workload orchestration platform. Why did we build this? Why would we build a distributed workload platform? We'll get a bit into the what of it is in a moment, but when we got together to build Bacalhau, we see there are three problems that are never going to go away, and yet will probably funnel most of our energy, and certainly our work energy, in the next few decades, and how we think about and build product services and technologies. The first one is it can't beat the speed of light. It's a fixed universal constant. So no matter how fast, how much bandwidth you have on the internet, there's still going to be inbuilt latency. And that's not a problem if you have a fixed amount of data. But the second problem is there's never going to be less data than there is currently. It's growing at an exponential rate. To I think about 5-6 years ago, we were all quite worried about the generation of data outstripping our ability to store it. And where you have an exponential growth in data and an ability to break universal constants to process that data in places simultaneously, you have a real challenge understanding and extracting value from the information you've got from your different products, services, and users. The third problem is governments. We believe, this one's a bit open to interpretation, but we believe that governments will never be less interested in protecting the data of their citizens. At the most selfish, and it is an incredibly valuable resource to have, and at the most dangerous end, it's a huge liability to have a huge amount of information about your people available to anyone or any entity anywhere in the world that may or may not want to cause harm to them. So this is why we built Bacalhau. It aims to tackle these three problems, and it does this by trying to offer you the same ability to process your data, but instead of trying to move your data to central places where you might try and compute these things, understand these things, analyze these things, you instead move the workloads to where your data lies. And that solves two problems. Okay, you're not breaking the speed of light, you're sending a great deal less. It's a lot easier to send a bit of code over the wire than terabytes of data for processing. You can send the code to the data, you're all good. The second one is it doesn't matter how much data you generate. It's all in the same place. That workload can execute over the data without ever having to move. So you completely remove latency as you build out your software and services. So you can have real-time insights as quick as you like. You can extract, you can transform, you send it to anywhere, completely up to you. But rather than having to worry about getting data from A to B for processing, you just have to worry about getting a much smaller workload to where it's going. And C, because the data never leaves anywhere, it never violates anyone's sovereign data laws. Governance is inbuilt in the nations and in the regions, locations that they are, because the data is in place and it's secure and it's governed by your rules and regulations of your software and your hosting entity / nation. So why, where can you use Bacalhau? Like I said, it's open source. You can go and download the code. In fact, I have some links for you all to go and read about it. When we first built it, we can anyone see that? Yeah, there we go. We have a great deal of expertise in our company around Kubernetes. In fact, my founder was the co-creator of Kubeflow. And we love Kubernetes. Kubernetes is great, but it also has a problem of spanning across more than one region. If you hit a network boundary, a regional boundary, if you want to try and hook up to Kubernetes regions to work together, it becomes a bit of a pain in the backside. With Bacalhau, we decided to use an agent model where you have a series of distributed orchestrators, which essentially route messages and workloads between connected and established nodes. So you can say, okay, I have 1,000 machines across the internet. Some are in Europe, some are in the US, some are in Asia. I want some way to be able to address either all of these systems simultaneously, or these systems in part based on the constraints they have for them, so I can do compute in places where they are running. And what's nice about that is Bacalhau doesn't care about whether or not you're in Amazon or Azure or GCP. It doesn't care if you're on-prem. It doesn't care if it's a smartphone in your pocket or a particularly powerful wristwatch. it will just connect to the network and say, hey, I am this device. I have these capabilities. I have this amount of data or this kind of data available to me, and I am now available for you to get me to do stuff. So what does that look like? It's incredibly simple. You can create a containerized application, and you can create a job file and say, hey, I have this container. It contains this code. I want you to run over this data. But the question remains, how do you have a containerized application execute on data in place without exposing the entire file system? That's what Bacalhau does. We don't give you access to everything. Every node that registers on the network can say, you have access to one of X directories, or no directories at all. If anyone comes along with a containerized application and tries to read or write data to a directory on a system that is not allowed, it will be rejected. It doesn't happen. But if you have very specific data, which is in a very specific place on a certain number of nodes, one or more, one or any number or more, I should say, then you can say, okay, I want this job to crunch that data, and if it's allowed, it will go and do it. It stays in place. And importantly, if you don't want it to, it has no egress path to the network. Bacalhau also controls what can go in and out of the system. So say someone did gain access to a network and said, I have this workload and its job is to egress as much information to my server as possible. If that container has read and write access to it because the node has been configured that way, it is totally possible that person can read every bit of data, but the network controls won't let the data go anywhere. So it's stuck in the system. Again, your built-in security and governance firewalls will keep everything in place. So yeah, that's pretty much what Bacalhau offers you. It offers you the ability to send workloads anywhere. It offers you the ability to control what can be read and written, and it offers you the ability to control what can go in and out of the network in a standardized, unified way. In fact, I just published a blog which shows you how to deploy static web assets to any Nginx server in the world simultaneously with one command, rather than having to SSH into a bunch of computers or have everything periodically poll an S3 bucket or just rebuild servers on the fly, something like the CDK confirmation stack. You can say, hey, I have this file. I'm going to wrap that file up in a job, and whoop, it's there. But that job can only write to the public directory of that server. It can't read anything else on there. So you have built-in sandboxes almost across your file system to keep your information safe where it is. You can also specify particular egress points. So let's say you want to say, I actually do have these data on these nodes in these 5 directories. The workload can read it. And I do want to be able to egress a transform subset of this data. Say you want to pseudonymize some information. So you want to do some sort of customer analysis, say, on retail information, purchases, but you don't want to be transferring PII because it becomes liable in certain sovereign entities for maintaining their certain security around that PII. You can say to a Bacalhau workload, okay, go to that data, take all those records, get rid of all the personally identified information or hash them so they're not personally identified anymore, and then allow egress only to a certain point. So you're able to select about that data, shrink it on down to what's actually important to you, make sure it's completely anonymized, and then send it off. And again, this is stuff that you can define in any language that you want. It's, again, really quite cool. Another application we've seen a lot of use case for is perhaps more relevant to the conversation we're talking about today, which is the deployment and training of AI models. Again, having a huge amount of data that is required to pull in to train a model can have regulatory issues, can have regulatory problems. Instead of having to move your data to wherever you want to train it, you can send your workload to train over the data in place. Again, solving that first problem of the speed of light and the amount of data that is growing constantly. I think someone mentioned there was a 400 billion parameter models being trained. Those don't go quickly. So yeah, it's an open source project. You can use it for free. I've linked it in there. It is a single unified interface for distributing web uploads across the world, regardless of compute power, location, and it gives the user the ability to define what the code is actually allowed to do. Software has an incredible amount of power to do whatever it wants in the system. Once it's in there, it can do most of what it wants, and there are controls at the user level, things like Linux sandboxes. Containerization offers the layer of protection. You can think of Bacalhau as both the route to where you want your compute to go, but also the enforcer of what that compute should be allowed to do. And that's it. That's the 10 minutes.